What's up, guys? Today we are going over one of the most successful and unique teams we have seen in the past several years of Advance OU, UD Steelix Gyarados team. So it's a physical offense team that starts out with a Pursuit Tyranitar because physical offense hates Will-O-Wisp Gengar and it absolutely must be removed. Speaking of things that must be removed, Skarmory. Self-explanatory, if you've got a bunch of physical attackers, Skarm is public enemy number one. If you can't get rid of it, then you are absolutely dead in the water. Thus, another trapper, Magneton. Next up, we've got the nigh obligatory Snorlax. Not only is it a prime beneficiary of T-Tar and Magneton's trapping capabilities, but it also dishes out a lot of physical pain while checking the entire special side of the metagame and generally being bulky enough to take a hit from anything. So in a pinch, it can save you against whatever the opponent might have, since it will be able to live whatever that hit is likely to be, and remove it from the game with its auto KO button self-destruct, which has obscene power and will take out just about anything. Finally, the things you might see on most other physical offense teams. That list ends with Salamence, whose DD set is an unforgiving late game cleaner. There's no dancing around its coverage, there's no outspeeding it, your check just better be able to weather its boosted hits. And that's why Mence is so good against frailer, faster offense teams. If it can grab that one dance, they are usually cooked right there on the spot. So now let's go into what makes this team unique. I'd first like to start off by saying a great team isn't just something that reinvents the entire metagame as we know it. Because, especially in the earlier gens, you are not going to suddenly turn them on their head with combinations of 6 Pokemon that have never been seen before. I'm not saying it can't be done, I'm saying it's really tough to do it and have it actually work. So, a lot of what makes something successful and good is the little changes, and little can be subjective. For example, on this team, the main thing that stands out is Steelix, where most people use Metagross, and some people might say, well, a Pokemon change is a big thing. Some people might say it's not. But I think it's not that huge a change, since at its core they still function the same, but it's the little things Steelix has over Metagross that really drive this team forward and set it apart and really maximize its tools against the metagame, and we'll get to that in a second. So I just wanted to say first that you don't have to revolutionize the metagame every time you make a good team. I mean, you don't even have to use underrated things as long as everything works together really well. But in terms of creativity, don't go looking to throw together a team of T-Tar and 5 UUs, because that's not the most conducive to winning. Creativity has to have a purpose. And what's that phrase? Mother is the necessity of invention. No. Necessity is the mother of invention. Jesus Christ, that was bad. I'm very sorry, but I hope you get my point. So, Gyarados, in and of itself, is not that unique, but what is unique is Rest on it. So, Rest is used to shrug off Toxics and Paralysis that would otherwise ruin Gyarados' sweep. Now, you might say, well, why don't you just use Taunt? That stops those things too. Sure, it does. But first of all, it doesn't stop Jirachi's Body Slam. That's a big one, considering how important a defensive piece of common bulky teams Jirachi is. But what's more important is that Taunt does nothing to stop the irrecoverable damage Gyarados takes in sand. So, for example, if you're trying to set up on Milotic or Blissey, and they're peppering you with Ice Beams or Seismic Toss, and you've got a Taunt to stop their Toxic, or else your sweep is just ruined, then you're taking damage, you're not healing it off, and Gyarados is not the strongest thing in the world, even with max attack. So you get chipped down, and then you take out one thing, and then you do damage to another, and then you get taken out yourself. And when you fail to KO Swampert or whatever, and then your Pokemon that on paper had such a clean sweep just got played around. And what Rest does is it takes advantage of these teams that can't actually kill Gyarados just by sheer strong attacks, but instead they rely on status and wearing it down. And instead you just sit on them forever, and you can DD and rest safely to your heart's content, knowing that it doesn't matter if Milotic or Blissey hit you with Toxic, because they can't actually hurt you, and you will just sit there until you're boosted to +6, and then you will actually sweep them. So rest is the unique part. And before I move on to the Steelix, then I want you to pretend it's a Metagross, because for the next thing about this team that I want to mention, it may as well be. So you may notice that this team does not have a true Dragon Dance Tyranitar counter. But what it does have, and if you watched my Salamence Metagross synergy video, then I'm sure you'll know what's coming. It has great synergy between these three, and 2 Intimidates, and you've got the Steel for the Rock Slides, and you've got the 2 Flyers for the Earthquakes, not to mention Intimidate to buffer against any physical attack. So realistically, with this guy's defense stat and these 2 Intimidates and their synergy with each other, you will be able to switch around whatever threat without having to plop a big fat counter on your team. So let's say you wanted to be safe against DD-Tar. Sure, you could just say, oh, well, I'm going to plop a big fat defensive Swampert on my team and then I'll be okay against DD-Tar. And yeah, sure, that works, but you're losing a lot of offense there, because Swampert on this team, I mean, a lot of people do it. It does fit on a lot of teams, because it is important to have that check to T-Tar, Mence, and Metagross, the big 3, the Titans. But at the same time, you're not doing it while exerting offense. Whereas with these 3, then the beauty of the Intimidate plus Steel, then you are able to play around the threat while actually turning it into an offensive opportunity yourself, and you're not sacrificing offense to be able to play defense. And I hashed this point a million times over in the Metagross Mence synergy video if you want to go watch that. But yeah, so that's important here because you've got 2 Intimidates alongside the Steel here. So now let's go to the biggie, the one that stands out, the Steelix. So why Steelix over Metagross? At their core, they are Steel type, which switches into physical attackers, and they explode on things that might trouble them, like water types, which would be really helpful for Salamence to sweep. So what does Steelix do that Metagross doesn't? I mean, Metagross is a lot stronger. So here's why. And this little change is an example of, or this little niche is an example of how a little can go a really long way in terms of actually winning games. So imagine this is a Metagross. Now look at how much opportunity Zapdos has against this team. It walls Gyarados all day, and it's gonna not be threatened by Tyranitar at all because T-Tar needs to run that special attacking pursuit set, which means no Rock Slide, and even if it does have Rock Slide, it's going to get burned by Gengar anyway. And it's not threatening Zapdos at all. And if it doesn't run that set, then Will-O-Wisp Gengar is going to destroy you. And, I mean, Zapdos even comes into Metagross itself and rains down Thunderbolts. And in Sand, Snorlax can't take these all day. No, absolutely not. It's going to get worn down by Modest or even timid Max Special Attack Zapdos in Sand. Magneton, that's, I mean, a check, but it's not great. I mean, you really need to be hitting... Now, this is not me saying Metagross cannot work here. Metagross absolutely can and has worked here, and it's a great Pokemon. And if you Meteor Mash Zapdos a bunch of times, then it's not going to come in for free. However, that's just one opportunity of how Zapdos can be threatening, because it also comes in on Gyarados itself. And Gyarados has necessary defensive utility of switching into water types here, meaning when the opponent goes to their Suicune or Milotic or Swampert against your Salamence or your Steelix, then you have to go to Gyarados, and there is the Zapdos entry. So it can be really tough to deal with it over the course of the game when it's raining down Thunderbolts and beating down Snorlax. I mean, God forbid that they get a spike, which they probably will, because not all offensive Zapdos have spikes, but if they do, then they're still probably getting them with Skarmory before Magneton actually takes it out. And so then it's just really, really messy, and you really have to go on the offensive, and it'll leave you making uncomfortable moves. So what's Steelix doing here? Steelix does not get forced out by Zapdos. Steelix switches into Zapdos. Now, you might say, well, I welcome the Zapdos switching into my Metagross because then I will blow it up and then Gyarados has a field day. Okay, so what about that Snorlax you were using your Metagross to switch into? Suddenly, look at this team with the Special Tar against Snorlax without Metagross. Are you sweeping with Gyarados against that healthy Snorlax that you can't really hurt without blowing up your own? I don't think so. So what this Steelix does instead of Metagross, it lets you counter Zapdos while not, or deal with Zapdos, let's say, while not having to blow your own Steel up. And you could say Metagross can run Rock Slide. It's a good idea, but it's not quite enough because you're still lacking that pure, perfect switch into it that you need, or would really like to have at least, when Zapdos comes into your Gyarados. So that's really important. It switches into Zapdos, and you might think, oh, one Pokemon? Yeah, look, Advanced does not have a million Pokemon in OU. Being able to improve your matchup against the commonly used Pokemon in the tier, that's a lot of what making good teams is about. If you can do that, and I mean, look, to a reasonable degree, obviously. Don't do dumb stuff just because it counters Tyranitar. The point of Steelix is that it lets you play like you have a Metagross, but with the ability to actually switch into Zapdos, which is absolutely enormous. And I can't stress this point enough. Now, of course, you might be thinking, well, why wouldn't I just use Steelix every time? Switching into Zapdos is perfect. And, well, Starmie is one of the biggest threats to this team. And Metagross is not as brutally O-code by it 80% of the time. That's Hydro Pump accuracy, in case you thought it was a damage roll. It's not as much as Steelix is. Metagross is actually not the worst check in the world to it, depending, obviously, if you pivot into Thunderbolt or Ice Beam, or if you have Protect and you can Protect out of Hydro range with leftovers and whatnot. Point being, you would much rather have a Metagross than a Steelix against a Starmie team. So with Steelix, then you do make that trade-off. However, Starmie is a lot more niche, and Zapdos, it's not niche, but it's not as slappable onto the most common, most powerful teams in the metagame as Zapdos is. And with Steelix, then, you can play around the occasional Starmie. It's much better to have to play around the occasional Starmie than to be absolutely ruined by Zapdos. And yeah, and look, when you don't run the Res Gyarados here, then suddenly you get ruined by Toxic Waters. So you can't say, oh, well, I'll run Double Edge Gyarados and limit the amount of switch-ins Zapdos can get. I mean, you can, but you're going to have to be really, really smart with how you're going to play around those Toxicing Waters. And it can lead to a really nasty situation if you're not very careful. So the rest here lets you play around things a lot more safely. I mean, a simple combination of Swampert and offensive Zapdos, you go from being absolutely trashed by it with an offensive Gyara and Metagross combo to just sitting on them and posing a threat always. So Zapdos can't even Toxic Metagross like it would, or Steelix, like it would Blissey. So that is the core of why this team works. It's a physical offense that handles the common threats to physical offense. It's got the Pursuit Tar for Lewis Gengar. That in and of itself is not unique, although it is a smart choice. But it's got the tool on Gyarados to ensure that it's not going to be stopped by things that shouldn't really be stopping it. And this alone gives you such a leg up because Advance is quite full of really passive teams that attempt to bring the game to a standstill, and against offensive Pokemon, they just wear them out. Things like Refresh Claydol and Suicune and Milotic and whatnot. And with this, then you give yourself longevity, and they will just not be able to KO you, and you always have that option. And you don't worry about Zapdos coming in because you've got basically a Metagross that can switch into Steelix. Obviously, it's not the exact same, but it's got Swampert's attack stat. And with that mentioned, I'd like to move on to UD's thoughts, some of them, that he so kindly wrote out for me for the purpose of this video, because I am doing this with his permission. So, the idea, he says, of the team was to run another double Intimidate plus Grounded Steel team. He used to have a Weezing team that also had Gera and Mence, and of course Metagross. And with Weezing, then he really had every physical attacker just covered without compromising offense. Remember, this is an offense team. You're supposed to be looking to dish out damage at every opportunity. When you lose sight of that and start putting on bulky things just because they counter something, then you lose the effectiveness of your own pressure. And when you're running offense, that's not what you want to be doing. Suddenly you have a team that doesn't do well, because you're not as effective as a dedicated bulky team, and you certainly don't have the offense of a really aggressive team, so you're just not doing anything well. You gotta pick what you want to do well and then really excel at that and play around the issues. And this is an example of that. This team does not sacrifice offense, but it's able to play around its threats. So, the idea, as I was saying, this is UD's words, double Intimidate, Grounded Steel, because he really likes it, and it's really good, but usually it's Metagross. And this time, it switches, the Steelix switches into both physical attacks, like Rock Slide and Snorlax, as well as things like Banded Hidden Power Flying, because Steelix has a very, very meaty defense stat that makes even Metagross's look like nothing, while its HP, for all intents and purposes, is basically the same. So it does that and checks Zapdos, which is incredible. So it really doesn't take anything from Rock Slide at all, like even Banded Rock Slide, whereas if you're not running the bulkiest Metagross, you might suddenly find yourself thinking, oh, uh-oh, now I'm in range of that +1 Earthquake, I better be careful. I mean, you've got the two ground immune Intimidators, but at the same time, it is something you have to keep in mind. Whereas with Steelix, you have the quad resist to Rock Slide, meaning it's barely ever out-damaging leftovers, and you've got the Meteor defense stat to eat those boosted Earthquakes even all day long. What's also nice about Steelix is that it is less prone to being trapped, which is really notable because this is not its main niche, but these are other benefits it brings. Dugtrio is one of the other worst Pokemon to face for a physical offense team. And Metagross is bulky, sure is, but it switches into so many attacks that leave it in range, and plus you've got the dilemma of deciding where to allocate all your EVs. You know, do you go bulk and lose out on speed and lose out on attack, and where does everything go? And so it's not as ideal, whereas Steelix very naturally, with just max HP, shrugs off Dugtrio like nothing. So let's go to the handy damage calc. So I was doing the calcs against HP Fire Mag. So you are going to be worse against Magneton. Only by a few percent, though. Not by that much. Obviously, if you're taking a bunch of Earthquakes, then it's not going to make much of a difference. But the first thing that Steelix does is, against Hidden Power Grass Magneton, then you are in the clear. Look at that. That is absolutely nothing. And whereas Metagross is still getting pounded by Magneton's Thunderbolt. So that's one thing Steelix has. The next thing Steelix has is Dugtrio. That is nothing at all. So that is potentially not even enough to 2-hit KO it after after Protect and Leftovers. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to make that impish. I just wanted to add in the 108 Earthquake, so this is a great percentage chance to KO it. I mean, you could and probably should pump more attack in just so you guarantee the KO or get a higher percentage chance or whatnot. But yeah, so I think 136 would be a good benchmark. Go a little more, you'll still be taking Hidden Power Grasses just fine. So against the Trappers, then this is a godsend, especially since Dugtrio is one of Physical Offense's biggest enemies. I mean, Tyranitar gets trapped, Mag we've got the Salic Berry, which does help, admittedly. We'll get to that later. So more words from the original author of the team. So he's not using Toxic because, first of all, refresh waters everywhere, and offensive waters are getting hit really hard with Earthquake anyway. Plus, defensive waters are getting stuffed permanently by Gyarados. So, Quake Slide coverage with Explosion, you're generally doing fine. Now, what this team does miss out on by not having the Steel Stab on Steelix is that Metagross would have with Meteor Mash is that Flygon does switch in more easily. So that is something you got to keep in mind. So a defensive, toxic Rock Slide Flygon could potentially be annoying because Gyarados can't sit on its Toxic and it threatens Salamence. So my recommendation would be to run an Ice Beam Tyranitar to lure that. But yeah, you can bait the Toxic, threaten it with Snorlax, and if the appropriate walls have been removed, Skarmory and Gengar, then you should be exerting a good amount of pressure. Worst case, then you can blow it up with Steelix, and that defensive Flygon is usually their physical wall. They're using it in place of Swampert. So at that point, you should be a lot more threatening with your Salamence. So that is one. That is another trade back, but the upsides are just enormous. So it's still keeping Boom because it is supposed to be a Metagross. So yeah, we've got this set. So and he's got the double DD for the actual offensive cleanup because you can dish out general physical damage all day long with your Snorlaxes and your Metagrosses. But sometimes you need that speed boost to just clean up at the end of the game, really force it on the opponent. So he's got the Pursuit Tyranitar and Magneton, because their trapping targets are really big for physical offense to function. So UD himself said he would consider both Ice Beam and his HP Grass as viable options, depending on your choice of Swampert or Flygon. Since Swampert is generally covered by Gyarados, then maybe Ice Beam is the better pick. I personally would think Ice Beam and HP Grass, because I think with Fire Blast and with Magneton, the need for Fire Blast is kind of whatever. So UD also says Brick Break and Ice Beam might be a good option to actually hit other Tyranitar, because while Lix, Gera, and Mence do cover Tyranitar's attacks, it's also nice to know that your own Tyranitar can threaten it, so the opponent can't use your own Tar as his own Tar entry over and over and over again, because this is offense. They're supposed to be able to switch around things, but not do so all day, and to do so you want to exert your own offensive pressure and not give the opponent a million opportunities to nail you with that attack that you don't want to be taking. Or even worse, many of them. So HP Grass does a little bit of damage, but Brick Break 2 it KOs, and also it does more damage to Snorlax in a one-on-one. So I forgot to mention earlier that when Steelix is switching into Zapdos, then Snorlax can be kept healthy for the Jirachi, the Celebi, the Suicune, whatever. And in general, it doesn't have to lose its health just to force Zapdos out, and thus it becomes a more threatening Pokemon on its own. And that's just something Metagross can't offer to Snorlax, but Steelix can. So yeah, so back to the words from the author. So he's got Fire Blast mainly because when he wants Salic Berry Magneton with HP Grass, because Swampert is important to hit, and he wants Salic to be less weak to Dugtrio because Dugtrio is obnoxious, but so is Swampert. So those are some pretty big targets, and people have been realizing Fortress isn't that good. So but you don't want to be completely dead in the water against it, so that is why UD has Fire Blast here, which is totally fine. I just think Ice Beam might be the more consistent choice. So, but again, this is preference. These are the really little details. I mean, the rest on Gera and the Steelix over Metagross, those are like the big things that make this team work. But other than that, I mean, I could suggest Leftovers Metal Sound Magneton, and it really wouldn't change how the team functions as a whole. Whereas these two, or this guy and this move, really are the driving force behind it. So that's just personal, and how you prefer to play it. So Salac Berry on Magneton is also useful because Starmie is a big threat, and rather than just getting drowned by Hydro Pump, then you have an option to force it out at least. So then you can hopefully get that opportunity to DD and break through it, which is especially useful when Steelix is... I mean, Starmie already feasts on standard physical offense because of all the OHKOs it gets. I mean, close to an OHKO. Yeah, I said close to an OHKO, not an OHKO from Thunderbolt. We will get there. OHKO, and usually this isn't an OHKO, but now it is, so extra tools are nice there. So, UD generally has a rule of thumb for grass moves. He has talked about this on the forums before. And mostly to fire moves, because Swampert is tough to kill, and so are Skarm and Fori, so you're generally going to want at least one of them on any team. Otherwise, those guys can be tough even if you have a plan. So it's just generally nice to have a tool. So that is another reason why he has it. So, of course, he says he might be more inclined to ditch the grass move at the expense of a fire move. He might want to run HP Fire Magneton, because you can still run Salac and threaten Starmie and pretend like you can do something to Doug if you haven't revealed it already, and then run the Ice Beam Tyranitar. I personally would do that. HP Fire Mag and Ice Beam Tar. And you can run like Endure Toxic or something just to cripple Flygon a little more. So Thunder Wave is generally nice for stopping Tyranitar from DDing twice if it's Lum. But I think with Toxic and the Resist, you'll generally be fine. So, plus with Salac, then you can mess with it as well. So, and Endure, of course, to rack up potential toxic damage. Anyway, so that aside, then moving on. So, the speed EVs here are to outrun Dugtrio at +1. And it also comes with the benefit of outrunning things like Jolly DD Tar, bulky Zapdos and Celebi that aim to beat those Tars, although that's not really as important. Good amount of Suicunes, and Endeavor Swampert, which is really annoying for physical offense. So good to have that option to beat it one-on-one. Especially since Magneton is usually one of Swampert's Endeavor Swampert's opportunities to come in and start wreaking havoc. As you can see, it doesn't really get a chance to do so for free anywhere else, because it doesn't have bulk. So, Snorlax, self-explanatory. UD chose Shadow Ball because he's got the mag for Lax and you want that hit. Honestly, I think you could mess with the Shadow Ball slot a little, but that's, just me being minor. I was going to say something like HP Bug, just so Celebi can't wall you. But again, this is not the kind of big change that's going to change how the team plays as a whole. So, yep, Lax is Lax. We went over that. So the EVs aren't really anything special. I mean, there is no correct Snorlax EV spread. Believe me, I have put in so many hours trying to figure it out, but there just isn't one. So you can really just do whatever. Just move the sliders until they look nice. You can add some speed creep for like Paralyzed Arrow or Camerupt or whatever, but it's not really that important. Boomwax mirrors are very rare. So here's where we get to the fun stuff, the Gyarados. So you must be thinking, what are all those fancy EVs for? So we already know that, as in UD's words, in an endgame scenario against Claydol, Milotic, and Blissey, those kinds of teams are very common, this Gyarados just goes to +6/+6 and just sweeps. So here is what the EVs are for. He wants to outspeed Starmie and Dugtrio at +1, although he doesn't have the Dugtrio thing here, I'm sorry. So that's that. This is for Starmie as well as beating Jolly Tar. So, because Dugtrio is not nearly as much of a threat to it. Of course, you could go a little faster. It's only a couple more EVs, but the bulk is already at a very sensitive point. And the Spadef and the bulk is for outrunning bulky Gengar and offensive Starmie Thunderbolt most of the time from full HP. So we're going to check the calc. So Starmie is the big one because in an ideal universe, Gengar is getting pursued, and Gengar actually has 3 less special attack with no investment, which is what most bulky Gar have. So we're going to go with, what is it, 208? No, it's not. 216. Oh, he's got the 30 HP IVs. All right, and then 88, but he's also got 30 Spadef. Yep, okay, so Thunderbolt. Yeah, so it's not about living Thunderbolt, cleanly, but living Thunderbolt from full and sand. So that's what this is for. So the obviously you can pump its bulk a little bit more, so you can always live in sand, but it's not going to be very. It's going to be kind of a pain to EV, but it can definitely be done. UD says, recommended even. So. Especially since the attack EVs are kind of arbitrary, so you can totally toss them in and just see what happens. I encourage any interested viewers to see a couple more EVs, and that's only 12 EVs, so you can throw more in HP and boom. So anyway, here's more from UD. I wanted a second DD-Mon since DD-Mence and Gyarados have very different sweep scenarios. Since Gyarados can sweep when it has a Watermon on which to set up, and Zapdos is dead or crippled, whereas Salamence just finishes weakened teams locked into Earthquake, the offensive ones. Like we said earlier, Mence blows past offensive stuff that's frail, and there's no dodging its coverage or outspeeding it, whereas Gyarados is not that strong and doesn't have perfect coverage. But the Ice Beam and Toxic stuff that ruins Mence, Gyarados feasts on that. The offensive stuff that might be too much or too fast for Gyara, Mence rips that apart. So they've got good synergy other than just, lol, I have 2 DD Pokemon. As for Mence's EVs, then he can, he goes with a Max because no nonsense. And the bulk gained can be arbitrary, which is true. If you actually use Mence to switch into attacks, like this team will actually do, since you're going to be switching around, to use its resistances and Intimidate, so something like switching into Heracross, then you will lose out, the Spadef EVs that live the Milotic Ice Beam or the Swampert Ice Beam. Then those don't do anything if you use Mence to actually switch into an attack that's not Earthquake, which always involves a degree of risk because it's not guaranteed that the opponent will use Earthquake. So, the speed is always useful, whether or not you take a hit, and it can be crucial in outrunning something like Mixed Mence is a big one, a neutral speed Mixed Mence, which I would say is most of them. A lot of people these days say plus speed Mixed Mence is the standard, but it's a nice tool to have because you know that you'll be, if it is guaranteed to be faster, which you can see from the sand speed ties if it comes to it, then you'll be able to shrug it off more easily with Gyarados. And since Gyarados has very nice natural Spadef, so that's another thing Gyarados does for physical offense teams in general. Most physical offense cannot switch into Mixed Salamence to save its life, but with bulk and rest, you actually don't do a bad job at it. I mean, I'm not saying switch into Dragon Claw every single time, have some finesse, but it helps a lot. It also helps with Will-O-Wisp Moltres, which might overwhelm Tyranitar, especially if it's paired with Gengar. So then you actually have a switch into it that actually counters it. And Moltres devastates physical offense. So it's another great thing Gyarados does here with rest. So having that anti-status option is just so good. I mean, you're not going to fit Heal Bell onto these teams. And the Gengar Moltres duo overwhelms T-Tar fast, since you got to pursue that Gengar. It's a bigger target. And I mean, hell, Moltres will beat Pursuit Tar one-on-one, since it can't actually hurt it, and it can't afford to really run a move to hurt it because it's a waste of a slot. So in all of the other scenarios, so you got to make do elsewhere, and Gyarados is that elsewhere. So final thoughts on UD's team from UD himself. He says, it operates beautifully with numerous synergies throughout. It's a physical offense team with incredible countermeasures to both Will-O-Wisp, Gengar, and Moltres, and even to an extent offensive Starmie, because Gyarados can live, and Magneton's got Salic. So, I mean, obviously it'd be better against Starmie, specifically if you had a Metagross, but then you're missing out on all the wonders of Steelix. So it's a dual DD team that actually switches into Zapdos. It's Magneton and physical offense team that doesn't immediately crumple if Skarmory manages to get rid of your Magneton before, such as on a Dugtrio double switch, because you can still you can still hurt it with Cheetor's Fire Blast, but if it's a very passive Skarmory team, you can just sit on it with Gyarados. Obviously, try to kill it with Magneton, but yeah, so. With T-Tar, Mag, Steelix, and Snorlax, you're not loving the EQ and fighting types. But then you've got your double flying Intimidators to handle Heracross and Flygon. So, the range for Gyarados living Thunderbolt from Starmie from Full and Sand is about 66%. So that's worth taking if you can absolutely win the game at +2/+2 after that. And again, you can throw in some extra EVs. So, yeah, that is most of it. It's got some threats like the ones we've mentioned. Calm Mind Jirachi can be annoying. Mixments can be obnoxious. Even more reason for a bulkier Gyarados. And, but yeah, and obviously you have to play around DD-Tar well. But nothing that can't be outdone. So I just want to finish this by going over some tournament games where this team has been used. So I already have this game on my channel, but we'll just breeze through it quickly again. Now, unfortunately, this team has not been used to the ridiculous extent that I can perfectly highlight the unique attributes of Steelix doing what Metagross could not. It's been used a lot, but it's not omnipresent because it's not as easy to pilot as Skarm stuff, so it's not going to be spammed as much by everyone you can imagine. That said, the good players have been using it, and that's generally a good benchmark to know if a team has really made it in a sense. So, but yeah, in several of these, it's just going to be Steelix basically being a Metagross. And this shows that the team does work overall as a general physical offense team would, but it's got the extra tools to bypass some of its troubles. So this one, then Gyarados was set to sweep almost right off the bat, but didn't. But yeah, so I guess a word on DD-Tar thudding against Pert, because you might have earlier thought, just run HP Grass, genius. Yeah, and then you struggle against Claydol, and it's just a mess. With Pursuit, you guarantee that you're doing something to your targets, even if they have the right anti-T-Tar Pokemon. So, see, here we have Steelix just being a Metagross, and honestly, Metagross would be better here because Meteor Mash, but we just see that the team is good as a whole. It's fundamentally strong, and at the same time, then Steelix is going to blow up on the boosted Snorlax, and there it goes. So yeah, this team is good here. Another team, this was also on my channel, and I'm going to speed the hell out of it because it's very long. But this is an example of Rest Gyarados. This is from the World Cup 2019 finals. And I don't know why the Mets is leading there. I generally wouldn't do that. Unless it lost its ban. No, it lost its leftover, so that must have just been an anti-undisputed choice. Generally, you won't lead a DD Mets ever. So, see, here's a great example. Since Magneton goes down to HP Ground Skarm, and he's got Curse on the Snorlax here. He must have dropped Shadow Ball for it because of the Pursuit Tar, which is totally valid. Absolutely can do that. Generally might be a bit superfluous, since most things are going to check Snorlax or not anyway, but it does prevent things from, like Milotic, from stalling you too safely in an absolute pinch, I suppose, without actually having to blow yourself up. So here we see Gyarados getting past Skarmory with a bit of luck, but now we see the magic in Rest. And Undisputed's team is very bulky, and it can't actually really hurt it. See, there's T-Tar, but if he can keep it away from that, I mean, it's still a long shot, but he's got the tools. Once he gets rid of this, then traps that, so Claydol can't possibly use Explosion, as unlikely as it would be without Magneton, since you would want Refresh to actually be able to deal with opposing Skarmory. Otherwise, your Claydol is just losing to other Skarm. Because you can't really count on knocking it with Hariyama on 100%. But yeah, now if the Tyranitar on these teams, it's so often Pursuit, and Pursuit Tar rarely runs Rock Slide, because what's the point of using a move that's going to be useless after you switch into the Pokemon you are meant to counter, that being Will-O-Wisp Gengar? Then, yeah, so they don't run Rock Slide, so Gyarados is a big, big threat, and here we're just going to skip through it. But the whole point is that Gyarados, it's sitting on Blissey, and it's just gonna... I mean, Undisputed has T-Wave Blissey and pretty much has to go for a Para, otherwise he wouldn't even be in this if it was a toxic one. So, and then Gyarados, it's Para or Crit, and doesn't get in, Gyara wins the game. So, yeah, those were the two big games I wanted to showcase. I have one more, I believe. Yes, ABR used this team against Tamahome and Kalos Invitational 3. And yeah, he also leads Mence, must be banded. This is a mistake, by the way. Should never be thick fat Snorlax. Use immunity. So here's Steelix. I mean, that's nothing that Metagross couldn't have done. But yeah, he's also got Curse here, and he's possibly got the Fire move for insurance. And see, getting rid of Gengar, so huge. Now Gyarados can win the game. So, I mean, that was lucky because we think it was Calm Mind, T-Bolt, Jirachi. And, sorry about that. And yeah, so if it was bulky Jirachi, he could have lived, plus Sand, possibly, who knows, it could have had Thunder. And it was, but the whole point is that we don't know, but that now Gyarados is threatening to sit on everything. So, and it's turning that annoying matchup of the impossible to KO Milotic that several physical teams struggle with without blowing up on it with Metagross, of course, a risky endeavor when Milotic is so often surrounded by trap Pokemon. Then, yeah, it's nice to have an actual safe switch into it no matter what. So, see, now Gyarados is just gonna... So Tama is reduced to going for Crunch Drops as it rests. And, I mean, he's got Roar, which, you know, forcing it to rest and then phasing it out, that's a Suicune thing, but since it's mono Milotic, then Mence is dangerous, so he's got the tools for any matchup. And in any case, since Gyarados is still looking really good once the other Pokemon went down and it was a last Pokemon scenario. So we're going to call it there. So UD's team, as you can see, is excellent. It can handle just about anything in advance. I mean, it's not perfect, but there's no such thing as a perfect team. If you have a perfect advanced team, please show me. I promise I'll feature it on the next video of the channel. Anyway, so I think I've gone on long enough. I hope you guys enjoyed. I will leave this in the description if you guys want to mess with it, because you've already seen it anyway, and I'm sure UD won't mind. I'll ask him anyway, but, you know. So, yeah, thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed. I will be doing this more when I have more teams. I have one more team in the near future I want to do, and then from there I will search for others. But, yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.